Oh.
So I just hit the power button. Back on.
Good deal. Yep.
It's very nerve-wracking being on the camera. Yeah.
No, it's just my trumpet.
You'll let me know when to begin.
Yep, we got 1 minute.
Really? Yeah, we've done what, 16 hours?
I think we can start.
Start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about loons today. If you've been to other loon presentations, you might recognize some similar loon information, but this one's a little different. The first half I'll talk to you about loons in general. The second half we'll talk about what it means to have loons as an environmental sentinel. So my name is Denise Silfee. I am the Director of Education and Communications at the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation in Saranac Lake, New York. If you've never been to the Loon Center in Saranac Lake, we invite you to come down anytime. In the summer, we're open every day, 10 to 5. We're still open every day right now, but eventually we'll be shifting our hours for the winter. So make sure you check online before you come in and visit. So at the Loon Center, we have a mission to inspire a passion for and the conservation of Adirondack loons as environmental sentinels, which I'll talk more about what that means in a little bit. We accomplish our mission through our research initiatives, our conservation efforts, and our education and outreach. So what's so cool about loons? There's a couple things. I might be biased. I think there's a lot of things that are very cool about loons. First, loons are part of the Gavidae family, which is one of the oldest bird families. They evolved to their current state about 10 to 20, somewhere between 10 to 20 million years ago. And there are 5 species of loons. There's the common loon, which is the one that we see in the Adirondacks and here in New York State. There is the Pacific loon, the Arctic loon, the red-throated loon, and the yellow-billed loon. I'm sorry, can you see?
Yes,
okay. All 5 species are considered northern hemisphere birds, which means they all live in either North America or on the Eurasian continent. And here's a little map that mostly is showing North America. If you can see the red parts here, I usually have a little pointer, but it's not showing up. So the red here, you can see that most of the breeding territory for common loons is actually in Canada. They do breed a little bit in some of the northern states, so we feel really lucky that we have common loons here in New York. You can also see them in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and a small population in Washington State, and a tiny population in the Yellowstone ecosystem in Montana and Wyoming. But none of the biologists there will tell you where they are. So they're that rare and that scarce and that protected. You can see from the red, this is where common loons breed, and those territories, it's a little harder to see some of the edges, but you can see that you can even find them, reaching all the way up into Alaska and a little bit into Greenland and Iceland. So loon calls. Loon calls are one of the things that make loons so unique. So I'm going to play a couple calls. You might be very familiar with them, but I'll play a few and tell you what they mean. So the first one that I'll play you is the whale. So this is kind of the iconic haunting call of the loon. So loons wail. This call is a way for them to communicate across distances with other loons. So when you hear loons using the wail call, often in the evening, sometimes in the morning, they're kind of letting other loons know, I'm over here, where are you? So some of the other common calls include the tremolo. And the tremolo is actually considered a distress call. So if you hear loons using the tremolo call, it's because they might feel a little threatened. It might mean that you or a predator or something else that is a threat is a little too close to them. So this is kind of a call that they use just as an alert that, hey, something might not be okay right now. So we ask people when they're in your boat, if you are watching loons, and you're getting a little too close and you hear this call, maybe give them a little bit more space or just let them move away from you. Another call is the yodel. Okay. I thought there would be another one there. So the yodel is also another distress call, but only male loons do a yodel. So again, when loons are feeling threatened by a predator or by people or by, just anything that's too close to them, usually it's when they have chicks and if they feel threatened for their chicks or for their territory, you might hear the males using a yodel call. And then the last one I'll play for you is the hoot. Very soft. So the hoot is a call that loons, it's also just a communication call between loons, and it's one that they use when they're close together. Usually it might be the male and the female, it might be the parents and the chicks, and it's just a way for them to communicate kind of in close quarters. But if you're out there watching loons and you're sitting quietly in your boat, you might hear them doing that call back and forth to each other. So certainly loon calls are one of the things that are very unique about loons. An interesting fact is that all 5 species of loons have unique calls. The common loons calls are considered the loudest and the ones that travel the furthest over distance. And they think that is because common loons tend to nest in mountainous areas. So those calls have to be able to carry over difficult or rugged terrain. Many of the other species of loons actually nest in the tundra where it's a lot flatter. So their calls don't have to carry quite as far. So just another reason why the common loons that we have down here in New York are unique, and we're very happy that they're here. So the Adirondack loon life cycle, kind of talk a little bit about it. Loons actually do spend half their year on the ocean. So they are migratory birds. So in the fall, they are supposed to migrate away from New York or the Adirondacks or the freshwater lakes where they are living and migrate usually to the coast. Now, where on the coast? It can be kind of anywhere on the coast. Loons, we can find common loons that nest in New York, anywhere from the coast of Maine down to the coast of Florida. We have no idea why loons choose where they go for the winter. Somehow they make that choice, and once they decide where they go for the winter, they tend to go to the same place every single year. It's one of those mysteries of bird migration that we don't fully understand. But they do not go to the same place. They spread out, and you could be down in Florida in January, and you could be watching loons that come back up here for the summer in New York. In the winter, they also have their winter plumage, which is gray, so they don't look the same. So you also might be seeing loons in the winter if you're on the coast somewhere or in the ocean and not know it. They don't have their black and white plumage. They look a little different. In the spring, they should be migrating back to their nesting grounds. So again, they can nest all over Canada, New York, some other states, but they always go back to the same place. So the loons that are born here in New York will tend to come back to New York, and they will come back every single year, and this will be their nesting and breeding area. They come back anytime, starting maybe as early as March, in April. It really depends on ice out or when the ice leaves. And that's another mystery of migration. They will reliably be here within 2 to 3 days of the ice being gone. And we don't know how they know that. So I think it's really great that we don't know everything, but we always know that once the ice starts breaking up, we can start looking for our first loons to be returning. Then in the summer months, this is when they pair up, they build nests, they hatch eggs, hopefully successfully hatch chicks and raise those chicks. And then in the fall, they should migrate back to the coast. I say should because with climate change and changing our winters are kind of changing, and we're having more and more loons that either migrate later and later into the year or occasionally not at all. We don't really know what that means or if it means anything yet, but it's just something that we've been watching. So when they are here in the summer, this is when they pair up. Loons are serial monogamists, so they like to have a long-term partner, but they do not mate for life. They, on average, have 4 partners over their life, or 4 mates over the course of their life. They are very long-lived. They can live to be 30 to 40 years old. So they will keep a mate for a long time, but if someone better and stronger comes along, they're not opposed to change. So they will find their mate, and they will spend a little bit of time preparing for the breeding season. Courtship for loons is very subtle. They swim in circles around each other and they hoot, and they might dip their bills in the water. But other than that, there's no big fanfare. Once they are ready to start nesting, both the male and the female will help build the nest. They build their nest right on the edge of the water. Loons can't walk on land. They are evolved and adapted for aquatic life. So they have to build their nest right on the edge of the water so that they can flop in and out without having to walk. So both the male and the female will take part in building the nest. When the female lays the eggs, she will lay usually 2 eggs and lay them asynchronously, meaning she'll lay the first egg and then maybe a day later lay the second egg. Then both the male and the female will take turns incubating the eggs. So they both sit on the nest. So if you see a loon on the nest, there's not really a way to tell if it's the male or the female. The females tend to be smaller, but unless you see them right next to each other, it's really hard to tell. So it could be either. They will incubate the nest for about 28 days. And then when the eggs hatch, they will also hatch asynchronously. So the first egg laid will hatch, and then sometimes up to 24, maybe a little bit longer later, the second egg will hatch. So this means that one chick is a day or so older and usually already bigger than the second chick. And then once we have our little loon chicks, in the first 2 or 3 weeks of life, the chicks are the little black fluff balls. They're very adorable. And they're small enough that they can ride on their parents' back. There's a couple reasons for riding on their parents' back. One is it helps protect them from underwater predators. Large fish are a major predator of loon chicks, and they can swallow loon chicks whole. So by riding on their parents' back, it helps keep them safe. It also helps the chicks stay warm, helps them thermoregulate, and also helps them save energy. In the first couple weeks of their life, they're really tiny, they're swimming, they're trying to keep up, and they're expending a lot of energy. So by being able to take a break, the cutest is when you see the chicks like sleeping on the parents' back, and it's just like heartbreaking how cute it is. So that's a way for them to save energy. If there are 2 chicks, I said that one chick is often larger and has hatched first. So the 2 chicks often will do something we call sibling rivalry, which means the bigger and older chick will pick on the younger chick. Sometimes, pecking at the younger chick, sometimes depriving the younger chick of food, sometimes pushing the younger chick underwater. And sometimes this means that the younger chick or smaller chick does not survive. It's hard to watch, but it's a very normal part of loon biology and of many other birds of prey, where the survival of the strongest young is really the most beneficial for the species. So we always tell everybody it's hard to watch, but it is unfortunately very normal. Just because they're bigger, I know. So hopefully our loon parents will raise their chicks until they are fledged. Chicks are considered fledged or considered juveniles when they're about 11 weeks old. To be fledged means that they're capable of flight. It does not mean that they're necessarily good at flight, but it means they can technically fly. It also means that they can feed themselves and they can take care of themselves. And this is when the parents will begin to leave them. So when they're about 11 weeks old, they will have this gray plumage. It's very similar to what the winter plumage looks like for adult loons. They will keep this gray plumage for the first 4 years of their life. And then when the parents will leave the chicks, they will go start socializing with other loons. When the chicks are young, the parents are very territorial and don't want other loons around. But once the chicks can take care of themselves, the parents, they say, see you later, you're on your own, I'm gonna go hang out with my friends. And then the chicks will usually hang out on the lakes where they were born for sometimes a month or 2, several weeks, practicing feeding themselves, taking care of themselves. and then hopefully figuring out how to migrate. That's the hope. So why do we study loons? There are lots of fascinating things to learn about loons. So we study loons, one, just to learn more about their behavior and about their biology. But we also study loons because they are considered environmental sentinels. So to be an environmental sentinel means that a species reflects the condition of its environment in a way that informs us about impacts to human health or impacts to the environment as a whole. Okay, so sentinel species are ones that are easy for us to see, right? We can observe them fairly readily. And they also are sensitive to changes to their environment. So when there are changes, it'll be reflected somehow either in their biology or in their behavior in ways that we can learn. So we also call environmental sentinels sometimes biological indicators, because again, they indicate to us things going on in their environment. So sometimes when we talk about sentinel species, people ask, is that the same as being a keystone species? So you might have heard the term keystone species, and they are not the same. Okay, so a sentinel species is one that teaches us about the environment or teaches us about the health of the environment. But a keystone species is one that if it's removed from the environment, that environment begins to collapse. So some examples of keystone species, there are keystone predators, which a great example of that is wolves. There has been a pretty incredible study of wolves in the Yellowstone region. Wolves were extirpated, which means they were extinct from the Yellowstone region for a long time. And then in the 1990s, we brought them back, right? We reintroduced them to the Yellowstone region. And the studies there show that as soon as wolves came back, everything else flourished, from populations of elk to black bear to coyotes to pronghorn, all the way down to beavers, willow trees, and the fish in the rivers. So a keystone predator is one that can help control populations of other animals so that the whole environment thrives. Sea otters are also a keystone predator. If you remove sea otters from their environment, everything else kind of goes out of balance. Another type of keystone species are keystone prey species. So this is a wildebeest, obviously from Africa, but here in the United States, keystone prey species include elk and bison. These are species that are usually really resilient. They can survive a lot of change to their environment. They impact their environment by eating plants, by moving, by fertilizing the earth, the soil, and they provide a stable food source for predators in that environment. So if you remove a keystone prey species, again, it disrupts everything else. And then two more types of keystone species are ecological engineers. So beavers are a prime example. We know that when we remove beavers from the landscape, it actually makes our waterways less healthy. Before European settlement of North America, there was 25% more fresh water on the North American continent. And then by removing beavers, we kind of deprived the land of all that extra water. So beavers are actually, by blocking water in ways that sometimes are very annoying to humans, they actually are really healthy for marshlands, bogs, and for for water systems. Another ecological engineer is a prairie dog. Prairie dogs, by tunneling on the prairie, those tunnels provide habitat for a lot of other species, and they also aerate and move the earth in ways that keep those prairie grasses healthy. If you remove prairie dogs, it affects over 130 other species, and it turns the ecosystem into a completely different one. It becomes a woody grassland or it becomes a woody forest instead of a grassland. So in these ways, keystone species are incredibly important. And then the last one is mutualists, which are two species that depend on each other. So a great example of that is bees and pollinating plants, right? Bees pollinate something like 95% of the flowering plants on the planet. They don't do really well if one of them is gone. So keystone species are incredibly important for a different reason than sentinel species. But we would say we want them both. We need them both. So just for a local example, Keystone species in the Adirondack region include willows, mountain lions, wolves, and beavers. And sentinel species in the Adirondack region include sugar maples, common loons, several different kinds of salamanders, and snapping turtles. So the keystone species are the ones that help keep that environment in balance, and the sentinel species are the ones that can teach us about anything harming that environment and potentially harming human health. So common loons as sentinel species, we use common loons to monitor environmental pollutants in the water, in our waterways. The big one is mercury. So this is how the Loon Center got its start. Our founder joined BRI, Biodiversity Research Institute, based in Maine. BRI uses loons to study mercury all over the United States, in the states where you can find loons, but they weren't doing that research in New York. So Dr. Schock worked with BRI to bring that research to New York, so that we can measure the levels of mercury in our waterways and understand how that is potentially harming the ecosystem, but also any threats there are to human health. So mercury is produced from coal-fired emissions, from industrial plants. The mercury that we get here, or that gets into our waterways, actually probably comes from the Midwest, and rides here on prevailing winds. So once mercury is in the air, it can travel in the wind, and then it gets into our waterways out through the precipitation cycle. Once it's in the water, it's methyl mercury, trying to make things very simple here, because it's very complex. But once it's in our waterways, it's methyl mercury, which is a neurotoxin, and it's harmful to all living things. The way that methyl mercury affects loons, we see that they become lethargic, they stop taking care of their chicks, they stop feeding themselves properly, and if there's enough mercury in the water, they can't reproduce anymore. So we take blood and feather samples from loons to measure the amounts of mercury, and that tells us something about what's happening in our water. So the reason that loons are such great biological indicators, or environmental sentinels of mercury, is because they are top predators. Adult loons don't have many predators, but adult loons will eat almost anything in the lakes that they call home. So because they are top predators, any environmental pollutants in the water will accumulate up the food chain through a process called biomagnification. So anything that's in the water inevitably gets into every living organism that's also in the water, but because top predators eat everything in the water, it accumulates the most in their bodies. And then bioaccumulation refers to how it accumulates more over time. So the longer loons are in a lake or in a water system that has an environmental pollutant in it, the more that they will accumulate in their bodies. So because of that, we can learn about how much mercury or some other environmental pollutants are in our water. And we do that by taking, like, as I mentioned, blood and feather samples. So Dr. Schock, the founder of the ACLC, or the Adirondack Loon Center, began this research with BRI back in 1998. And since then, we have sampled over 500 loons in the Adirondack Park. Right now, we're pretty focused on the Adirondack Park, but I think sometimes we will leave that blue line to go test loons a little elsewhere. But it's a pretty big area, so we're trying our best to cover as much as we can. So every summer, we go out and we capture loons, and we take those samples so that we can measure them. And the process of doing that is called banding week. Every summer we have Loon Banding Week. It's like a holiday for us, where we go out, our research biologists go out, and they spend the night, all night. They work through the night and they sleep during the day so that they can go capture loons and take all these tests. The reason they go out at night is because it's very, very hard to get close to loons when they can see you. But at night, if you have a spotlight, you can, it's kind of like deer spotting. You can use a spotlight to momentarily blind a loon so they can't see the boat. And then if you play loon calls, the loons will come right up to the boat. And if all goes well, you can just scoop them out. They still put up a fight. They don't like it. But that is the best way for us to capture the loons and then take them back to shore and take all of those samples. So we take blood samples, we take feather samples, and we also do a whole bunch of just general tests, health measurements, so that we can learn more about how healthy our loons are in the Adirondacks. Once we have all of our samples collected, we then band the loons. These photos are taken during the day so that they're a little easier to see. We also band loons if we rescue a loon, but it's all the same process. We give them 4 bands. They get 1 silver USGS band, which has a number on it, identification number, and then they get 3 colored bands. And the combination of those colored bands is unique to that bird, so that we can identify that individual loon anytime that we see that loon again. Once they're banded, then we give them a little pat on the head and we let them go, and they go back to their loon lives, hopefully without much distress. So what we have learned from doing this over the last 20 some years is a couple key things. One I've already mentioned. One is that you can see that as you go from Alaska to New Brunswick, so west to east, you can see that levels of mercury are higher in eastern loons than they are in western loons. And again, we believe this is because prevailing winds carry mercury emissions east. At one point in New Brunswick, loons had so much mercury in their systems that they were not breeding at all anymore. So you can see that this is a trend that we can't really do a whole lot about, as long as there are still coal-fired emissions. But it gives us some information. You can also see from this that the blue are male loons and the red are female loons. And you can see that male loons tend to have more mercury accumulation in their bodies than female loons. A couple reasons for this are that male loons are typically larger. So if you have a larger body and you're eating more prey, you're just accumulating more pollutants into your body. Another reason for this is that females can actually shed some of the mercury in their body when they lay eggs. So there is mercury, you can find mercury in loon eggshells. You can test those eggshells for mercury as well. So we do that. But we think that because they can shed the mercury that way, they're actually able to keep a little less mercury in their bodies. Something else that we have been able to learn over time is that right around 2010, the levels of mercury began to plateau. So we believe this is because of successful legislation. In the 1970s was the Clean Air Act that put some regulations on all kinds of emissions, including coal-fired emissions. And it takes a long time for those changes to kick in. But it has kind of plateaued. There is still mercury in our waterways. There is still mercury being released into the atmosphere, but it's a lot less than it was in the past. So this is a good thing. If you listen to the news and you hear talks about rolling back some of that legislation, we consider that bad news. So we would expect that if that happens, probably there would be a delay in seeing that result, but eventually then we would see this start to go back up again. Once mercury is in the system, in our systems, it's very difficult to remove it. Maybe it dissipates over time, but that's a long time. So kind of once it's there, it's there. So that is one of the concerns for us as well. So another way that we study loons and kind of keep track of changes to the environment or use them as environmental sentinels is through our summer lake monitors. So every summer we hire anywhere from 20 to 30 lake monitors who are seasonal workers that go out, they get assigned different lakes, and they just go out every week and they watch the loons on that lake. So they're specifically watching our banded loons so that they can kind of observe any threats to their nesting success or anything that happens to them over the course of the summer. So it's not a bad job. If anyone wants to be a loon monitor, you let us know. So the way they do that is with those bands, even though you would think that loon legs are underwater, it's actually not that hard to see the bands on loon's legs. You can, if you have binoculars or a good long distance, a telephoto lens, you can sometimes see the bands just under the water to see the colors. But also loons help us out because they like to do this thing we call a foot wag. where they will pretty regularly stick their legs out of the water. I think it's my favorite thing I watch them do because it looks very awkward no matter what. But they do this for a couple of reasons. One, a foot wagging loon is a relaxed loon. So if there's a foot wagging loon, you know that loon is okay with you being there. Also, it's a way for them to thermoregulate. So loons control their body temperature through their legs. So they might remove a leg from the water if they need to cool off or warm up, and then they might put it back when they're done. So this is one way that we can also see the bands on their legs. Another way is when they're bathing. If you see loons bathing, it can be very aggressive. They thrash, they splash, and they sometimes roll over upside down and they kick their legs in the air. That's another way that sometimes you can see the bands on their legs. So our loon monitors, they observe the loons, they follow those loons, they observe what happens to their nest, if the nest is successful or if anything happens to make that nest not viable, those eggs not viable. Sometimes if there are eggs that are abandoned, our lake monitors will go and collect those eggs. Sorry. Yeah, they're really small. They'll collect those eggs, and as I mentioned, we can test the eggshells for mercury, and try to figure out what's happening to those loons or why that nest was not successful. So other ways that loons are indicators of environmental health. Increasingly, we're observing the impacts of climate change on loons. So these photos here, not sure where to go. I'm just gonna go stand over here. So in these photos here, the top photo, you can see this is a loon. You can see there's little eggs right here, and this nest is in the process of being flooded. So more and more, because we're having more torrential rain events in the Adirondacks. So those are events where there's a lot of water that falls really quickly, and it causes the lakes to rise very quickly. And we're finding that loons, their nests are getting flooded, and they can't do anything to change that or to save the nests. This photo is from a nest cam, and it's in a long series of photos that is actually quite sad. You can watch the parent loon trying to add sticks to the nest, trying to make it taller, and they can't keep up with the water. So these eggs were lost. So again, by observing this, though, we're observing in kind of real time sometimes how climate change is impacting the loons, and then we can extrapolate that to say how it's impacting other species as well. One of the ways that we are trying to help loons deal with rising water is through our nest traps. You might see these little floating contraptions. We deploy these very carefully. If we put too many nest traps out in the environment, it actually makes loons fight more and makes nesting success decline. So we have to do it very carefully. But in instances like this one, where maybe this loon's nest has become threatened year after year by rising water, if we can give the loons there a nest raft, it gives them a way to nest safely, and that will rise and fall with the water. So this is one way that we are able to intervene on a limited basis to help some loon pairs nest successfully and mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. And we also, as we watch loons, we get to see the impacts of human disturbance. Wake boats is becoming an issue that we are looking at because wake boat activity affects loons' nesting success. So this is something that we're starting to kind of get involved in. And then another big one is water clarity, that we're starting to look more at water clarity. We know that loons are visual hunters. They cannot hunt if the water is too cloudy or too murky because they have to be able to see their prey. So water clarity is really important for loons. And if lakes become less, if they start browning, as is happening in some places, and they're less clear, loons will stop going to them. So these are all different things that as we can observe and we can study loons and their behavior to learn more about the environment. So all of these reasons, for all of these reasons, I should say, loons are considered a species of special concern in New York, which means they have protected status. They are not an endangered animal, so we're not concerned about the whole population going extinct. But we know that they are very sensitive to changes to their environment. We know if you've been in the region for a long time, you might be able to remember a couple of decades ago when it was very rare to see loons. And then, now there's a lot of loons around. We're really happy with it. We actually think that there's a very healthy population of loons in New York State. So we know that because they're sensitive to those changes, again, it teaches us something about what's going on in the environment and also gives them this special status that we want to protect them so that we can continue to learn from them and hopefully keep them here. So some of the other things we do at the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation. I talked a little bit about our research. A big arm of that research is studying mercury as an environmental pollutant. Increasingly, we're also looking at PFAS or forever chemicals, which are also an environmental pollutant in our water. But this is the big part of what we do, is looking at environmental pollutants, climate change, and studying the population in general. We also do our conservation work, where we try to mitigate some of the threats, the human-caused threats to loons, and then all of our education work, which includes talking to wonderful groups of folks like this, and also sending some of our staff out to talk to youth and into schools to talk to kids, to try to help people understand more about loons, but also just more about loons and the ecosystem that they call home. So the biggest thing that you or we can all do to help loons is to just recreate responsibly. Loons are actually pretty good at living with people. You see them on your lakes or here on the St. Lawrence River, out from our docks or near our homes. They can live with people pretty well. So with just a few tips, we can make sure that they stay safe and healthy. So in general, we ask everybody to respect all wildlife, and that means giving them enough space. It's really nice to get close to animals, and we want to get close to them because we want to see them. But we do encourage people to try to watch from a distance and to take cues from the animal. If the animal's moving away from you, it means they want more space. So we ask you, please don't chase the loons or anything. Don't chase the bears. They will tell you they don't want to. Please don't approach or touch nests. On our nest cams, we unfortunately capture a lot of photos of people reaching into nests and picking up the eggs. Please don't do that. If you see a loon nest, we encourage you to give it even more space, right? We want loon parents to not feel threatened and not to abandon their nests. If they feel like people are too close, there is a real chance that they will abandon the nest completely, and then those eggs are not viable and they won't hatch. So please give nests even more space than you would a loon swimming in the water. We also encourage you to use non-lead fishing gear. I was just talking to Karen about that today. Deaths from lead poisoning are a leading cause of death for loons. So loons swallow lead fishing gear. Often they swallow the lead fishing gear or tackle that is still attached to fish. So if a fish breaks the line, or if you're fishing and a loon takes your fish off the line, which we know anglers don't like, but it can happen, they will swallow the fish, but they'll also swallow jig head hooks, which often have lead soldered to the top of them as a weight. And they will get lead poisoning and die in 2 to 4 weeks. It is 100% fatal for loons. I have never heard of anybody successfully rescuing a loon from lead poisoning. So we ask people to just make the switch. There's lots of alternative materials out there, and most tackle shops carry them. If you want to learn more about lead stuff, we have a lot of lead programs that we're really happy to talk to you about too. And you can also report any injured loons. If you see a loon on the road, that is always a loon in distress. As I mentioned, loons can't walk. So if you see a loon on land, it sometimes means that they came down out of the sky at the wrong place. And once they're down, they are stuck. They can't walk to water, and they actually need a 1/4 mile of open water to take off to fly again. So a loon on land always needs help. Please call us and we'll come get it, and hopefully return them safely to a body of water. You can also report loons that you see that are tangled in fishing line, or loons that appear really sick. Sick loons often beach themselves if they have lead poisoning or something else. So you can call us and we will send out volunteers or our staff to come help those loons. And you can just talk about these things to other people and help them understand as well. And you can support our work. That's the last one. So that's what I have for you today. I'm more than happy to answer questions to the best of my ability. Again, we are located on Main Street in Saranac Lake. We have some new exhibits at our Loon Center. We're going to be moving to a new location next summer. So we're really excited to have an even better Loon Center for everybody to come visit. But you're more than welcome to come to the one we're currently in now. We also have a gift shop where we will sell you anything you can imagine with a loon on it. So thank you very much, and I'm very happy to try to answer your questions.
Is there any way of testing the water for the mercury level? And is there a way of desalinate water, to put something in the water to help the mercury dissipate?
That is a really good question about testing water.
Yeah.
I don't think so, because I imagine we would do that instead, right? Because it would be a lot less. Do you know, can we test water for mercury?
I'm pretty sure we can.
This is Leah. She is our wildlife tech. She came with me today. That's a great question. I've actually never thought of that, because I think I assumed if we could test the water, that would be much easier. I know that we test a lot of animals to see the accumulation of things like mercury. So I think that is the best way to understand levels of mercury. It's a good question though. I'm going to go look it up. And then in terms of getting mercury out of the water, there's no way to do that I know of or that I've ever read about. Yeah. Once it's in there, I think, again, over time it can dissipate, but it's a very long amount of time, and not one that probably is very meaningful to a single person's lifetime.
Is that what's called acid rain?
Yeah, part of acid rain. Yeah. Any other questions?
The first year loon that takes off and goes south for the winter, or goes to the coast for the winter, how do they know where to go?
It's a great question. It's also a little bit of a mystery. So there are people have been trying to figure that out. James Peru is a loon biologist from Maine. He's actually going to be our guest speaker at the Loon Celebration on October 5th in Paul Smith's. He's amazing. He's one of the best experts on loons there is. And his research, he believes that loons have to learn to migrate, but they're not quite sure how they do that. They're not sure how they learn. So he believes that juvenile loons have to learn to migrate because they make so many mistakes. So often once they fly, they'll fly to another body of water and then maybe another body of water, and they kind of bounce their way.
They don't follow mom and dad.
They don't follow mom and dad. Occasionally they'll follow another loon, but we don't really know. He in his book, he writes about how they believe loons have to learn to migrate, but they're not quite sure how they do it yet. Migration is I think it's an incredible mystery, and I love that it's a mystery.
So they don't migrate in a flock like geese?
They do not. Nope. They might migrate with one or two other loons, but mostly they migrate by themselves. Yeah, they're very solitary in that way.
And is there any indication that they end up migrating to the same place where their parents did?
Nope. They usually go somewhere different. Yeah. So, and loon pairs, often the male and the female, they will not go to the same place either. Like each wintering location seems to be an individual choice. And you'll have loons that they just bounce over to Maine or New Hampshire, and then you have ones that go to Miami. We don't know why or how they choose.
Will they come back with the pit to the same spot that they were born?
Yeah, so loons, they like to nest, if they can nest in the same place where they were born. So male loons choose the nesting site, and they like to choose it based on where they were born. Naturally, that spot might not always be available because you might have a sibling or another loon that was also born there. So male loons, then they will look for somewhere usually within a 10-mile radius of where they were born, and they'll look for a spot that has the same characteristics as the lake where they were born. So like similar shoreline, or if their nest was on a log or in the reeds or in the dirt, like they'll look for something very similar. And then once they choose it, they will go back every single year and they will fight to the death other loons to keep it.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then there's a question here.
Yeah. The nests, do they stay there until they migrate, or is that only for when they have babies?
Yeah, they just use the nest to hatch the eggs. And then once the chicks are born, they usually will leave that area, but the chicks can't fly. So they have to stay in the same lake, but they'll usually go and they can kind of have I've seen loon families that use kind of a large area of the lake. But they'll usually go to a place that's a little protected, like a little cove or a bay. And they'll raise the chicks kind of in that area. And then as they get bigger, they tend to spread more and more into the lake. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, they don't stay right at the nest. They do move away. And then the parents, when the chicks are raised, the parents will leave and go hang out somewhere else. But the chicks will stay on that lake for a while.
If you were to see a nest that you watch over time and you see that it, for instance, it routinely floods out or something like that, is building one of those rafts, is that something that's recommended for like the private property owner? Or is that something where they should call you or?
Yeah, you can call the Loon Center. Our research biologist will come out and just assess it to make sure it's a good fit. Like I said, there's a couple of difficulties there are some very specific ways to construct them that don't harm the loons or other wildlife. If they're not built kind of right, they can have sharp edges and they end up hurting wildlife, which we don't want to do. So there's some pretty specific ways to construct them. And then also our biologists, they want to make sure that it's a good fit for a loon, a nest raft. Because again, the trouble with nest rafts is they become desirable nesting territory, and that just creates more fights. So typically they're looking for nests to fail multiple times in the same spot for kind of reasons that a nest raft can mitigate. So the rising water is one of those. But you can call the Loon Center or email us, and we put you in touch with Leah or our research biologist Griffin, and he talks you through it and can figure out if it's a good fit. So yeah.
I have an initial answer to the mercury after some Googling.
Okay. Leah was Googling for you.
You can test for mercury in the water. The mercury that we're concerned about for humans is the methylmercury, the biological one. So that's not going to very much be tested in the water. And it accumulates to the levels we're concerned about in animals.
It's a different methylmercury, then it's good for me to know. Thank you.
I'm pretty sure, based
Okay.
on Googling.
Based on Google, okay.
Dr. Google.
Yeah.
What are those rafts actually made of? How are they made?
Leah can probably answer that the best. The ones we use there's a couple different models, but Leah, do you want to answer the ones we use and what they're made out of?
We buy ours from a company in Maine that distributes them to a couple different places. Ours are made out of lobster wire that's wrapped around flotation devices, and then we shove some composite wood boards through them that help them float. And sometimes we add accessories. So we have some avian guards we use, and we have some planter boxes.
So that roof is lobster wire?
Yes,
Is there a reason for the roof?
for eagle attacks.
Not every nest raft we call them an avian guard. Not every nest raft gets one. We try to be as minimal as possible, right? If we're going to intervene with animals, we try to do it minimally first. So we add the avian guard if the nest raft increases the likelihood of eagle attacks. But again, our biologists are the ones who they can kind of look in that and see what's happening, and they'll talk to you about what you're observing happening as well. So yeah, lots to consider with that one. I'm going to go here and then I'll come back over here.
Do you do a loon census in the Adirondacks?
We do. So every it's the third Saturday of every July. There's a loon census. You can sign up for any body of water or big enough body of water in the state of New York to be a census volunteer. And actually in this area, Tilt organizes volunteers for the St. Lawrence and Thousand Islands area. So you can, we put out a lot of information about that, but also you can go to Tilt's website, I believe. And Save the River. Okay, so they organize the volunteers in this area. So if you live locally here, go to one of those organizations and they organize their volunteers here. But it all comes into us then, and we get all the information.
Well,
So.
for more than 12 years, I've been donating loon paddles. So if you register with Tilt, you have a chance to win a loon paddle.
Good promotion. Yeah,
What about ospreys? Do they?
ospreys are fish eaters.
Okay,
So yeah, they eat
never
fish.
mess with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fun fact about eagles, right? We don't want anybody to go out there and think eagles are bad guys, right? Eagles are just doing what eagles got to do. But they are a natural predator of loon chicks. They might attack adults to try to get to the loon chicks, but eagles are not predators of adult loons simply because they cannot carry them. So eagles can only carry about a third of their own body weight. And when they attack something, they like to carry it away. And an eagle and a loon actually weigh about the same. So eagles are bigger, but loons' bones are denser because they're evolved to dive. So an adult eagle, there's no point in them attacking adult loon because they won't be able to carry it away. Eagles are also scavengers, so if a loon dies and goes up on the shore, they might eat the loon then. But I just think that's interesting that they can't be predators of adult loons simply because they can't carry them away. But they are predators of loon chicks.
Have you ever held a loon during banding or anything?
I haven't because I'm always the one taking the photos.
We had a family of loons in Densmore Bay. Would you just clarify, all of a sudden there were just two? Is it the adults that left or the chicks that left?
The chicks, if the chicks are still there, they'll be gray. So they're different colors. So the adults would be black and white. The chicks would be like a gray color until the chicks should leave after the end of the first summer. But if at the end of the summer you're seeing only two, it really depends on what color they are.
So it could be either or.
I mean, usually the adults leave first.
Okay.
But it's easy to answer if you can get close enough or use binoculars to see what color they are. Because the chicks are, as juveniles, they'll be gray. The adults will still be black and white. They usually leave first. They go congregate with other loons and then eventually migrate. The chicks usually takes them a while to learn to migrate, so they tend to migrate after the adults. So it's probably the chicks.
Sort of as a follow-up, do loons teach the young ones how to fish?
Mhm,
How
yep.
to eat fish?
They teach them how to dive and hunt, and it's
They
kind
bring
of
the fish up and eat and
Yep.
feed them to the chicks.
Yep. So they'll start by feeding them and then, encouraging them to eat bigger and bigger things. Sometimes you'll see the adults are trying to force feed a very tiny chick a very large fish. And the chick is like, I can't, and the adults have to learn how to be good parents too. So, but yeah, it's a whole process, and it's great to watch. Like if you have a loon family, that you can observe over the course of a season, you'll get to see all of that. You'll get to see the adults teaching the babies. You'll see the babies begging for food, even all the way up until they're old enough to hunt for themselves. They'll still beg for food if they can. And the parents will ignore them, and encourage them to hunt on their own. But yeah, it's a whole process. So it's a cool thing to watch.
So when you see all of the swans, which are now classified as invasive, so we've got all these swans and we've got the ducks, we've got the loons, we've got the geese. How is that impacting? How are the swans impacting them? Because they are the biggest ones in the water.
Yeah, we're not super worried about loons' safety with swans, other than we know that loons and swans, they compete over the same nesting territory, and they're both very territorial birds. So, swans will defend their territory, loons will defend theirs, and that can cause conflicts. And just that they have the same nesting territory. Loons and geese also share nesting territory, and it's a very natural thing for them to kind of fight it out. Again, we don't worry about loons too much. Loons they're very aggressive. I think the biggest thing is, maybe geese can pick on loon chicks in ways that can be harmful. But loon parents are also really good at defending their chicks. I think the biggest thing would be to see how that affects their nesting territory. And who wins, right? Who gets pushed out and who doesn't have nesting territory and has to find a new one. Yeah, that would be my biggest thing that I'd be looking at and wondering like how that will play out. Yeah, and it's really hard with invasive animals, right? There's one thing for humans to bring an invasive animal like across an ocean, and there's another when invasive animals are moving because of things like climate change, right? I was living in Oregon for a long time, and barred owls started migrating towards Oregon or, moving towards Oregon because climate change gave them like a corridor of warm air that they could follow. And now we have barred owls that are competing with snowy owls. Oh my goodness. What's the owl in Oregon? Spotted owls. It's like the one everybody's very concerned about. Barred owls are competing with spotted owls now. In ways that are bad for spotted owls, but it's really hard because barred owls came there because of forces, that humans created or beyond there. It's a tough thing. I don't know the answer to it, but I try to just look at, I think if animals are kind of moving on their own, we might just have to see what happens because it's really hard to manage at some level. It's a little different than bringing them over on a boat and just releasing them. Australia has all kinds of problems, but. Did you have a question?
I did. Since they don't walk on the land, how does the baby get up on the back of the bear?
They kind of just, like the same way that the parents get in the nest, they kind of can use their legs to push themselves up.
So they sort of just jump up.
They kind of like, they just like push,
Figure-
use their little
figure
wings.
Mom might pick them up by the back of the
No, mom
neck.
doesn't do that, but I
Throw 'em
think,
up
I
there.
think mom can help. They can like, I've seen the parents like pick the babies off.
Okay.
So I'm assuming if they can bump the babies off, then they also can make it easier for them to
Just
get off.
dive underwater and they're gone.
You've seen them like do the thing where they shrug them off, you know?
Several years ago, I saw rats that were over on this side of Canoe Point, back in a bay, that somebody had put there. And I mean, I don't know if it was during that, when we hit the torrentially high water up here, where, how often are loons literally drowned? I guess the eggs are drowned because the water fluctuates so in some
Yeah.
areas, like up here.
You know, last summer was bad for flooding nests down near Saranac Lake and in the Adirondacks because we had just so many huge storms. I mean, it felt like every other day we were getting these flooding storms.
Yeah.
And then I believe, I don't want to say for sure, just because I want to make sure I ask our researcher first, but I believe I heard him say that flooded nests were the number one, you know, reason that nests weren't successful last summer. This summer, it didn't rain as much, so that wasn't quite as big of a thing, you know, but I guess, excuse me, to answer your question, it really varies by season. The biggest thing is like when the nests flood and there's eggs in them, it can make the eggs inviable because it messes with the temperature and the incubation, right? Loon chicks, once they're chicks and hatched, rarely drown. We did have, and this spoke to the severity of the storms last year, we had 2 chicks that were not super small. They were like 4 weeks old. They drowned on Mirror Lake because there was a storm that had like waves, and we found them, and there was nothing else wrong with them. They drowned. They couldn't handle the waves. That's rare, right? That's rare. They're aquatic birds. They're very capable of dealing with rough weather. The adults are on the ocean half the year, so for them it's not a problem. I think this was just a really severe storm. And the chicks, when they're that young, are used to fresh water, but it's flatter. So, yeah.
Chicks are also, nests are at risk of drought as well because the parents can't walk, so they can't get back up. So this summer, that might have been something that we need to look into.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's true. I never thought of that. The water levels went down.
Any effects of the avian influenza on them?
Not a lot yet in New York. There were 2 cases a couple years ago, and then I believe this year we've had 2 cases, but not in the Adirondacks. I believe both were on like Long Island. So not a huge impact yet, but they are migratory birds, so it affects migratory birds. It's affecting migratory birds a lot right now. We think that maybe because they don't flock, you know, they are pretty solitary, and if they do congregate with other loons, it's not in huge groups, and then they migrate like in 1 or 2 group, like a group of 1 or 2 or 3 individuals, but not a big flock. So maybe that's keeping them safer. Yeah, and they also aren't scavengers. So right, eagles are getting avian influenza a lot. I think before the summer even, I haven't seen an update since before the summer, there were 40 cases of avian influenza in bald eagles in the Adirondack Park. And they think that's because they're scavengers. So if they're gonna eat a dead animal that has avian influenza, they're gonna get it in a different way. But loons, they aren't scavengers, so they have to get it from each other. So far the loons are okay. Can't say so much about the other birds.
We have a cottage up in Rideau, Canada, Newborough, that type of thing. And it's fabulous to have these birds come in and just, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, and they just swim up a little bit.
Yeah.
But they just go away. It's fun.
It's great. Yeah. We want people to enjoy loons and other wildlife too, right? And loons, because loons can do really well with people. I tell people all the time, if you are in your kayak or in your boat, you know, or sitting quietly, they'll often come check you out.
Yeah.
You know, if I sit in my kayak, sometimes I will have multiple loons pop up, you know, and just look at me.
Yeah.
And then they go away. They just want to check it out.
Yeah.
So,
Even the motorboats.
and sometimes with the motorboats, if you're sitting quietly, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like that they're used to that.
We're invading their territory.
Yeah, the adults do okay, usually do okay with motorized boats. It's the chicks, right? When loon families are in season, we ask people if you have a motorized boat to look for them and try to give them space, because basically an adult loon can dive and get away from a moving boat. Chicks can't dive yet, right? There's a big period of time where they're not diving underwater or not doing it well. So if you're heading right towards a loon family at a fast speed, you're probably forcing the adult loon to either abandon their chicks to save themselves or stay with their chicks, and everybody gets run over. So when we see boat strikes, a lot of times it's, when I look at it, if it's chicks involved, I'm like, well, the parents probably didn't want to leave them. So, and they can't get away. So,
What is the loon
Unless they
population in
crawl
the
up on their
Adirondacks?
back.
What is the loon population in the Adirondacks?
in the Adirondacks, we think it's around 2,000 to 3,000 adults, and we think that that's like stable.
Is it?
Yeah, like too many, and they start to not do well, right? No environment can have an unlimited amount of any species. So we think that's a good stable population, somewhere between there.
Yeah.
So.
What's their typical territory as far as like how close the nesting pairs will get?
I think it's an average of 22 acres, lake acres. I have no idea how to measure that. I don't know how to measure an acre, but the characteristics of the lake also can determine how close they will be to each other. Large lakes actually have less nesting success because the pairs fight more. There's more loons, they do more fighting. And then small lakes usually can only support one nesting pair. So like the medium-sized lakes are the sweet spot. And then depending on the characteristics, like we have I would say it's a small lake, but maybe it's a medium lake near us in Saranac Lake that supports 3 nesting pairs, because the shape of the lake gives each pair a little bit of a little bay where they can kind of be away from the other ones. And they seem to do really well. The six total adult loons, they'll actually go congregate together in the middle of the lake and leave the chicks at the nests, and then they'll, go back to their nests. So 22 acres is supposed to be the average size, but it really depends on the individuals. So yeah, you gotta get away from those kids. I have no concept of time right now.
It is 6:29.
Okay, great.
Good
right
timing.
Right on the nose.
It says when the loons migrate, they head to the coast.
Mhm.
Is that the southern coast?
Any of it, Maine to Florida.
Maine to Florida?
Yep.
In the winter, they'll stay from the cold.
I mean,
They like cold. They're cold weather birds. So yeah, they'll go anywhere on the coast, Maine to Florida. Loons that are nesting kind of central Canada will also go to the Pacific Ocean. So really, it's any coastline, and south is relative. And then there's again this guy James Peruk, who's going to speak at Loon Celebration, wrote a book called Loon Lessons. It's really great. I've read it 3 times and I learned a lot. I learned that when loons are on the coast, how far they are from shore depends on where the continental shelf is. So up north, like off of Maine, the continental shelf is closer to land. So they will sometimes be like within 7 to 10 miles of land. But down south, the continental shelf is sometimes like 30 or 40 miles from land. So they will be out there. So they tend to kind of, wherever they go for the winter, they hang out wherever the continental shelf is relative to the land there. Probably because it's good hunting. Also, loons are not top predators on the ocean. There's bigger fish in the ocean.
So the only time that they're really on land is to breed.
Just to nest, just to sit on the nest. That's it. Yep.
Do they seem to have a preferred species of fish that they?
I believe that is probably something that somebody has an opinion on.
Okay.
I don't know if I know what it is. Does Leah know what it is? Do you know what it is?
We think that they really like yellow perch, and we
Yeah.
think that they may have evolved their hunting habits specifically about yellow perch.
There you go.
So the yellow
Because
perch
they're
decline up here in this
narrower, easier to
river.
swallow.
Because they can
Yeah.
dart back and forth with them.
Yeah.
They will also eat other things, so maybe they can adapt away from that if they need to, but yeah. All right. Well, this is great. You've had great questions. Thank you so much.
You can high five, that's